Hey, this is Dave Scherrer, Kingdom Offerings. I want to say that Jesus is a bit of a mystery. He seems to be operating according to a whole different set of rules and priorities. A proper rabbi of the first century doesn't do the things he does. I want to comment on a few of those, some of those stories, some of those accounts where he's messing with our minds and with our priorities, our worldly priorities, especially our sensitivities. You know what? Over the next few podcasts, I want to talk about Jesus during his last week of his ministries and some of the crazy things that happened during that last week. Things that really test our understanding of his mystery. Because not only was he messing with some, priorities and sensitivities, but he was also messing with some of ours, not just first century ones, but some of our personal paradigms, the way we do business here, how we think. Now we take those forward, and here in the 21st century, we're confused as well. And so that'd be us. So let's start. Let's start with a somewhat familiar story. And it's the story of, maybe you sang this song when you were a kid, the story of the wee little man named Zacchaeus. So let's talk about Zacchaeus and kind of the mystery that's happening there. It's happening just shortly before Jesus' death. It's only found in the Gospel of Luke, and you would think maybe the other Gospel writers would tell that story as well, but it's a very short story. It's only about 10 verses, but it tells a story that's much longer than that, much longer than its 10 verses. So let me unpack that with you. We'll go right to that passage in Luke. And it says that Jesus entered Jericho, and he was passing through Jericho. And so let's just take that much for a moment, because this is the beginning, let's have, we can say this well, this is the beginning of the last week of Jesus' life on earth. It's actually the end of the week before the beginning of the last week of Jesus' life on earth. At the end of this chapter, if you move your eyes forward, is the triumphant entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem. So we know that this is right at the end of Jesus' life. He's on his final trip to Jerusalem. On this trip, he also heals a man born blind from birth. We're actually going to talk about that soon in another podcast. And you can read about that story in the Gospel of John. So Jesus is setting the stage, I guess you could say, for his last week of teaching at the temple and for his redeeming work on the cross. He has all of this in mind when he sees Zacchaeus. Now he's walking from Jericho to Jerusalem, and that distance is about 17 miles going southwest. And it sounds like a pretty long walk, right? 17 miles. But that's all people did in that day, was walk. You had to walk. And so you could get from Jericho to Jerusalem in a day, a long day, not that long maybe. And so the trick about that, going from Jericho to Jerusalem, though, is it's dramatically uphill. Jericho is 500 feet below sea level, and Jerusalem is almost 3,000 feet high on top of Mount Zion. So 17 miles going up. But if you got an early start, you could be into Jerusalem by mid-afternoon, taking a couple stops, stopping for lunch, and by evening you would be there. But here's the deal. News travels fast. Even faster than the speed of walking, it seems. Because as Jesus is making his way through Jerusalem, the news is getting forward. As Jesus is making his way through Jericho, Jerusalem is hearing about his approach. That's a funny thing about gossip. It travels fast. Maybe you've noticed that. So let's keep going. There was a man there by the name of Zacchaeus. We're reading in verse 2. He was a chief tax collector, and he was wealthy. So those are a couple important points. Let's just stop here and we're going to make a point. Zacchaeus was essentially, in the eyes of fellow Jews, was a traitor of the Jewish people. He was Jewish himself, but he was collecting taxes for the Roman government, the occupying Roman government. And he made his riches by essentially stealing from his neighbors, asking for more taxes than were due, and then he would take the difference. So Zacchaeus, he was not a favorite among his Jewish friends. I don't know if they're friends even, but his Jewish associates from his town of Jericho. The verse says he wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead, and he climbed into a sycamore, a fig tree, so that he would be able to see Jesus, since Jesus was coming that way. So that's the story we remember, right? He was a wee little man, and he climbed up into a tree in order to see Jesus. The children's story kind of stops there. Wee little man was he. But there's much more import to the story than Zacchaeus' interest in seeing Jesus. I think the interesting part here is that there was something going on in Zacchaeus, in this guilty man's heart, where he wanted to see Jesus. There was something mysterious, something very different about what he was seeing, what he was hearing in this person of Jesus. This rabbi was noteworthy. He was different. And word had gotten out. It had gotten to Jericho. And Zacchaeus had issues. He had things on his mind. He had things on his heart. You see, just yesterday, this man Jesus, on the streets of Jericho, had healed the blind. This man had cast out demons. This man had raised the dead back to life. Zacchaeus had heard about all this. I think most important to Zacchaeus was that this man, this rabbi, this Jesus, he forgave people. And what Zacchaeus was in desperate need of was forgiveness. So that's the clincher. I think that's what this story is about. That's the bottom line. Let's look at verse 5. When Jesus reached that spot, the tree, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down now. I must stay at your house today. And so he came down at once. And it says that he welcomed him gladly. The sinner welcomed Jesus into his home gladly. All right, so all the other people are watching this. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. Apparently that's not great. Rabbis don't do that. Rabbis don't go hang with bad guys. But I told you, Jesus is a mystery. He's doing things different. He's doing things different in this last week of his life. He's hanging with cheaters. He's doing dinner with traitors. Jesus not only looked into the tree, but he looked into a man's heart. It says in verse 8 that Zacchaeus stood up. He's been entertaining Jesus and listening to what Jesus has to say. And Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, Master, King, God, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, and he has, that's a given, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Okay, here's a little bit of an editorial. When salvation comes to the human heart, like it has to Zacchaeus and to ours, things change. Our behaviors change. Our attitudes change. Our priorities change. Zacchaeus' hands opened. Zacchaeus became a giver, not a taker. You know what? He became a member of the walking forgiven. That's quite a status. So, how did Jesus put it? In verse 9, Jesus says, today, salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. It's kind of speaking to the Jewish bloodline. This man's a Jew, a son of Abraham. And then he talks about himself, Jesus does. He says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. So, the mystery of Jesus. When he comes upon you, it changes everything. So I guess there's a test for us. We have to ask ourselves, when I encountered this man, Jesus, did I change? So for here, now, this is 2026, and it's Ash Wednesday. Today happens to be Ash Wednesday, and it's a good Lenten question, this am I changed question. You could pray, Lord, search my heart. Reveal any changes that you'd like to make. Give me courage to yield. Amen. So we're going to look at this Jesus, this mysterious man Jesus, again in our next podcast. I want to say I am Dave Scherrer, and this is Kingdom Offerings, and we're part of 100-fold Ministries. Hey, let's do this again soon. Peace.